Okay, so for Module 3, Part B, where we're starting to work on animating the player character, I'm not quite sure actually if I'll have 2 or 3 videos. Probably I'll do 2 where this will just be a quick summary of all the steps. And so here are the 2 links that we're going to be using. So let's go ahead and take a look there then. Okay, so we're down here in animation. We had just finished that game coding structures. Okay, and we could go look at the Unity manual. Let's see what the Unity manual has. Okay, so we can see here there's a lot about animation, and actually none of the content in here is really talking about 2D animation. We can see once again that we have these states connected by arrows. We can see here that this is a 3D character. So we're just to know, because I think that's a nice thing for you guys to know. Okay, so what I'd said is that I want you guys to come in here and pick a sprite sheet, and I need you to have us be working with the idle, the walk, and the jump sprites. Okay, so let's come back here. Okay, and so we want to see, how do we create an animation from a set of sprites? And so the first step is to drag multiple sprites into the scene panel. And we do that, we're going to see that we have several different things that get created. We'll create an animation clip, we'll create an animation controller, which has this little finite state machine diagram. This has a little play icon. So those are 2 different things. And then there's one other thing, and that's this animator component. So if we look at this animator component, right, a component is what we can put on a game object. So all 3 of these things are going to be created when we drag a series of sprites into the scene window. And so if we look on this animator controller, what we can see is that this is the animation component. It has already associated with it this animation controller, and that's the one that we saw right here that gets created. These will be created in our assets, and we'll automatically have a game object created that has these things on it. It'll pick like the first sprite. So let's go ahead and see that. So I'm going to come back into Unity, and I had kind of gotten ahead of myself, so we could see that I had created some displays, UI elements for our score and our health, and then a couple little panels. I'm going to go ahead and a start button. I'm going to delete all these. Score panel, delete, results panel, delete. I'm going to leave the name text that we had from project 1, because when you are done with the animation, I'm going to have you take a screenshot again, and I want your name to be showing up down here. So we'll just kind of get that out of the way. Okay, and we're going to be working in this animator controller. So let me okay, so here I have some sprites, and I downloaded them into my downloads, and I'm looking for, like I said, the idle sprites. So I'm going to go ahead and use Shift and select all of those. Let me come over here to my project window. Oh, I had already made some folders. So you'll need to make folders by saying create folder. So I'd made a folder for sprites and a folder for scripts. So in the sprites folder, it looks like I've already dragged in all of these sprites into my sprite folder. Let me go ahead and grab the other ones. So I wanted the idle, I want the jump, drag those in, and then what else did I want? I want walk. Okay, so here we go, walk, drag those in. Okay, all right, so now I have all these sprites down here in my assets. And we're going to start by taking in fact, I'm going to go ahead and delete this character. I'm going to say this was our placeholder, and I'm going to delete that sprite. Okay, I'm going to select and drag all of the idle sprites. I'm in the scene view version. I'm going to drag them all into the window. And you saw that little thing that said multiple. So the first thing that happens is I get prompted, and it says, looks like you want to create an animation for the game object idle. So let's go ahead and say that this will be my hero. Let's see, hero idle. I don't care what you guys name it. I just want you to yeah, figure that out. Okay, so now we can see that I have a game object, and it has this animator component on it, and it has an animator controller. It looks like the icon has changed a little bit. We can see down here it's the same thing, right? We can see down here that we have this same, let's see, let me go ahead and do this. It's a little easier to see. Okay, so once again I have this little knob that I can move. Okay, so this is going to represent our animation clip now, and this is going to represent the animator controller that was created. So if I have this game object selected, I'm going to rename it to player. Okay, and this is going to be, so each time we drag sprites in, we're going to have more game objects created, but this player one is actually the only one we're going to keep. So we're going to be deleting a bunch of things as we go along here. When I have the player selected, let's go ahead and in the hierarchy, let's go ahead and look at this animator window. And the way I got that opened was I went to Window, Animation, Animator, and it had opened up here and I dragged it down here. I prefer it. So some people might like it up there. I really prefer it down here. Okay. Okay, so we can see that we already have some, I can't really zoom in on that. Okay, so we already have, in this animator controller, we have this entry state, this any state. So we have 4 states by default. The first 3 come in always, and then this one was created when I dragged all those sprites in. And what we can see is when I select this state node, I have this animation clip selected up here, and it's set as the motion. So it's set as the motion. We'll come in here later and we're going to manually create the other states, but we need to have these, we need to have the animation clips created. So that's what we're going to do. So the easy way for us to get those animation clips created, I'm going to slide this back, is for me to grab the next set of sprites. So jump to jump, drag that in here. Okay, I'm going to call this hero jump. When we write file names, we can't have any spaces. Okay, and now I can probably see that we have 2 of these animator controllers and 2 animation clips. Okay, let's go ahead and push play, and we want to see if these both work. Okay, so we can see that these animations work. We have the idle, we have the jump. All we really want from the jump is this animation clip. So I'm going to take this animator controller and I'm going to delete it. So delete for the jump. Yes, delete. Okay, so I deleted that animation clip, and I'm also going to delete this jump character, this jump player, the game object. Delete. Because what we want is we want all those animations to be associated with this one placeholder character. Okay, so then the next thing we need to do is drag in all the walk sprites. Okay, we drag in all the walk sprites and we'll get the same thing again. Goodness. Okay, so creating a new animation, I'll call it hero walk. Save. And once again, we have a new game object added, right? On that game object, we have an animation component, animator component. We can see that we have by default that little animator controller on there. So let's go ahead and play, make sure that it works. Okay, so we can see that it works, so that's good. So now let's go ahead and delete that. Okay, so we only have one game object that represents the player, and it has on it this idle controller. That's the idle one. That's the one we want. I'm going to need to find the other one, the walk one, and I'm going to delete it. Okay. Delete. Okay, so the goal was that we need 3 animation clips. We dragged our sprites in to get the animation clips, and then we need 1 controller, and the controller we want is the one that's on the player, the first one that we created. It doesn't really matter which one it is, but So with the player game object selected, I'm going to come and open the animator window, and now we need to create states inside here for those other animation clips. So once again, if we look up here, we can see that the motion associated with this, right, this is the hero idle state, but the motion that is associated with it is the hero idle clip. So I'm going to go ahead down here and say create state. I'm going to say I want an empty one, and I'll call this one. So I click on that, and I can come up here and I can rename this, and I'll say this is hero, walk. So hero walk, and then I'm going to get to select, come on, okay. I get to select this animation clip. Okay. Okay, and then let's do the other one, which is hero jump. So I'm going to create an empty state, click on that, and now we're going to call this hero jump. And I'm going to select the animation clip that goes along with that. Okay, so we're making progress. All of these states are now part of our animator. Come on, will you let me get bigger? Okay, let's push this over a little bit and see if we can get these things to be a little bit bigger. Okay. Okay, so here's the states. And now what we want to do is we want to decide what are the events that we want to have supported. So we get to customize this. It's up to us. We get to decide. We could decide that the hero can only get to jump if it's coming from idle. We could say that we don't want to be able to go from walk to jump. That's one choice we could make. We're going to go ahead and make all of them. So I'm clicking on this state. I'm going to say I want to make a transition. And what that does is it gives me an arrow that I take over and connect. So I've connected. Now it's possible for an event to take us from the idle state to the jump state. And I'm going to go ahead and make one back the other way. I'm going to say that if I was jumping, I want to go back into the idle state after that happens. Okay, so then let's say that also we can go from idle over to walk, and that we can go from walk back to idle. And then let's go ahead and say that we can go from walk over to jump. And then we could say, well, do we think that there'll ever be a time when we're going to go from jump to walk? And the thing is, it's really just depending on what we want to do. If we say that there's some event that would allow us to go from walk to jump, then we would want to make a transition. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so now we have 6 transitions, and we'll have to see what we do with those. What we want to start with is we want to come over here and we click on this parameter. We're going to make a parameter that's going to allow us to, when I click on these arrows, right, it tells me that this is an event transition that takes me from one state to the next state. And I have the ability down here to put conditions on here. Okay, so I can add a condition, and it says I don't have any parameters. So the conditions are controlled by parameters, and I want to say basically that if I'm in the idle state and one of the left or right arrows are pressed, I want to be able to go into the walk state. And so the way we'll do that is we're going to create an integer parameter, and we'll call this hero state. And the way that this is spelled is going to have to match the same spelling in our code. So hero state, now I have to go on each of these arrows and decide what the logic should be. So I'm going to have us think about it this way. Let's assume that if we're in the idle state, that we want that variable to have a value 0. So then we would say that on this arrow that's going from idle to walk, now we can add a condition. And the condition we can add is, we can say hero state. So I selected that. It'll look easier to select next time. I'm going to say hero state. If hero state is equal to 1, then we want to go from idle to walk. Okay, the other thing we want to do is this little has exit time. We're going to uncheck that. And what that would mean is that if we don't uncheck it, it means that the entire idle animation clip needs to run through to the end before we'll change states. It's basically saying that we can't interrupt it, and we do want to interrupt it. So we're going to want to interrupt whatever frame we happen to be on in idle the minute that this variable goes from 0 to 1. And essentially that's going to happen because we're going to write code to send in to this system this value being changed, basically depending on the keyboard input. Excuse me. So now we have to go through and put the logic on each one of these arrows. So now I'm going to go from walk to idle. Now I can see if the hero state is equal to 0, right? We're going to assume when we're in the walk state, that has to be equal to 1. And so when we're in the idle state, that has to be equal to 0. So if we go from 1 to 0, then this gets activated. Let's do the same thing here. Let's say that when we go to jump, we want to have this hero state equal to 2. Hero state equals 2. And we're going to also say we want to interrupt that. And then we'll go the other way. Now when we go through the jump one, we're going to say if hero state is equal to 0, then we want to go from jump down to idle. But let's go ahead and leave this checked. That way we'll get the full jump animation. Okay, and now we have the last two to configure. So I've said we do want to be able to go from walk to jump. That would mean that we're going to send this has to go from being 1 to being 2. And here we do want to interrupt the walk. Now when we go back from jump to walk, right, we're going to add a condition. We're going to say this parameter, when it equals 1, then we want to go back to walk. And we will leave that exactly how it is. Okay, so now we can actually, before we do any coding, come on, let me open this up. Okay, before we do any coding, we can actually start playing with this variable, and we can go ahead and push play, and we should be able to see our animation working. So we can see that we're in idle, and we can see down here, that's what's so nice about this, is we can see what's the active state. So when you guys take your screenshot to submit, I'm going to want to see your character, I'm going to want to see your name, and I'm going to want to see this diagram down here so that I can see that you have these states working. So now if I come down here and I change this to 1, we can see that that event happened, and now we're in this state. And we assume that these events happen instantaneously so that we're always in one of these states and only one of these states. So now we're in walk. If I go ahead and put 2 in, now we're in jump, and we're going to stay in jump until either this value goes back to 1 or this value goes back to 0. So let's try and have it go back to 1 and see what that looks like. Oh, it went to 0 when I zeroed it out. Okay, so we can see by playing with this parameter, we can actually see how well the animations work before we put the code on this player character. Once we put the code on here, then we won't be able to play with it using these. Okay, so then one last thing is, let's go ahead and look at the Git book, and if we look at this animation steps, we can see going through all the steps, these icons are slightly different. This is telling what we want to create and what we want to delete. And then it shows going through and making all these states. I had a dead state, but we're not going to use that one right now. And this is how we went in and we named the state. We selected the animation clip. Here's where we created our parameter hero state. This time I only had one arrow, it looks like. And then here we go. This is telling us how to configure each state. So in the idle state, we need that idle animation, and we need 2 transitions. We need to go from idle to walk and idle to jump. So you guys can follow this table. And this is telling us about exit time. And remember I said we want to keep it checked when we go from jump to idle or walk. So here we can see that I've said if we're in the idle state, and this is the table form of representing a finite state machine. If we're in the idle state and this hero state becomes 1, then we'll transition to the walk state. And on that arrow, so this is the event condition, this is the arrow, we want to have exit time set to false. So it's set to false for everything except when we're going from jump to either idle or walk. Okay, and that's showing all those arrows that we will end up getting configured. Okay, so let's see, let's come back here and see. This is coming back up and looking at the animator controller again. It's showing us that when we drag that first set of sprites in, we had a clip that got made, we had this controller that got made, and then we had this character, a game object, that already had this component on it. And the clip, we'll learn more about these clips because we can go in and make animations of all sorts of things. Okay, and this is just trying to explain all these things. Eventually we're going to have to create a script. So next I'll have a little video where we'll come in, I'll review that all real quick, and then we'll paste this code on there and see how that works. We'll talk through the code. Okay, so we'll stop there for right now.